My name is Paul Taylor. I'm a paediatrician. I was born in England, but I live and work in Nelson, New Zealand, which is pretty close to paradise. And in my professional life, I started off as a neonatologist taking care of critically sick newborn babies, and I've gradually morphed over the years to somebody who's got a real interest in how kids behave and how people respond to how kids behave. Nobody comes to see me who hasn't been identified as having an issue, a behavioural issue. So people want guidance, the family wants guidance, the school wants guidance, maybe relatives wants guidance about how come this child doesn't fit into what they expect. And I usually try and explain autism as being hardwired and a difference. And most of my parents know the difference between Apple computers and Apple computers and Windows computers. And when I say, well, your little guy is an Apple computer and he's trying to survive in a world of Windows computers, they get it. And they immediately see where the mismatch has been. In other words, we're dealing with a little child or an older child or a teenager or an adult who just doesn't fit into the way most of us operate because he's running a different operating system. Having made a diagnosis, you've got a family, a child in a wider context, which usually involves a preschool or a school, and you give them a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and people think, wow, this is really, really bad, because the general perception of autism comes from the past, when an autistic child was somebody who was locked in, non-communicative, rocking backwards and forwards, really somebody very severely disabled. And I need to be able to get beyond that and explain what's going on. And I found I didn't know anywhere to do that. And by this stage I had been in schools. I'm developing talks primarily to schools, because schools are the environments in which most of these kids sink or swim. And I made presentations for schools, and pretty soon I realized that the presentation, which evolved over time, could be a book. The very first patient that came to me that got me seriously interested in the need to do something was a boy who was 7, and he had been expelled from 2 schools, and he was on his 3rd and final school. If he was expelled from that school, then he would have had to be educated at home by his parents, which is a huge punishment for parents. And he had been expelled from school because he would pull a knife or a weapon, or he would lash out. So he was considered to have an anger and aggression problem. And I saw him and I diagnosed autism spectrum disorder. So I got myself invited to go and talk to the staff at school, and we came up with a strategy in which he was allowed to have a fridge box in the class, and inside the fridge box there was a cushion and soft touchy-feely things, and whenever he felt stressed or upset or afraid, he was able to go into that box and self-calm. And then when he felt ready, he would come back and rejoin the class. And they said, oh, well, he'll spend all his time in there. You know, who wouldn't? But I said, actually, most people with autism do want to be part of the class. They want to participate, even though they don't know how. But to make that work, I had to explain to the kids, how come this guy's got a fridge box in the corner with all the stuff in it? So I went and talked to the entire senior syndicate of kids at that school, 150 kids from these top levels of the school, because they already knew there was something different about this person. So I put it in the framework of Apple versus Windows computers, and kids that age all get it. And once they realized that he was different, that validated their perception that he was already different. And suddenly, from having a bunch of kids who were frightened and looking sideways at him, there was a bunch of kids who were willing to help him. Now, it didn't kind of immediately work, because there were still lots and lots of other people in the school who still put pressure on him. Like one day he forgot to bring his running shoes, and it was a school of sports, and his teacher said, you can run with bare feet. And as he was on his way there, another teacher said, I'm sorry, you can't run without having running shoes on. And he was furious, and he stomped back to his classroom and pulled a pair of scissors on the nearest adult that he could find. So I had to go to the Board of Trustees to persuade them that they shouldn't fire him. Fortunately, they went along with me. And that was the last major incident we had with that young man. And what we ended up with was an autism-friendly school with a whole bunch of kids who were supporting the child and a whole bunch of teachers who knew how to approach him differently. And that was all very powerfully synergistic. And that's how it all started. And that's where the genesis of my book and my work has been. The feedback that I've had in writing tells me that parents really like the book because it's accessible, it's easy to read, there's no jargon. You can read it in an hour if you want to. You can dip into it because it's broken up into lots and lots of little sections. And teachers say they love it as well because it gives them insight into what they could do differently. I'm hoping other people could learn something that they find useful, just like the people who've already read the book.